Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Ghosts of the Polar Expedition. I never thought I would find myself recounting these events, much less believing them. But as I sit here, isolated in the frigid wasteland of the Arctic, I feel compelled to document everything that happened during our ill-fated expedition. Maybe, just maybe, if someone stumbles upon these notes in the future, they'll heed the warnings we so foolishly ignored. Our team was one of many sent to explore the icy reaches of the Arctic. The goal was simple: research climate patterns, map uncharted territories, and gather valuable scientific data. For many, this was just another expedition. But for me, it was an escape, an opportunity to prove myself in the most desolate place on Earth. The isolation felt like a calling, a chance to be at one with the vast, untouched wilderness. The journey began as expected. We arrived at the base camp, a sturdy wooden cabin left behind by a previous group, long since evacuated. The air was crisp, biting at every exposed inch of skin. The snow beneath our boots crunched like brittle glass, and the sky seemed perpetually cast in a dull, gray twilight even at noon. We set up our equipment, worked through the daily routine, and soon settled into the monotony of life in isolation. But as the days stretched into weeks, small, inexplicable events began to occur. It started with the howling winds. At night, as we lay huddled in our bunks, the wind seemed to carry whispers, faint voices that, though indistinct, felt as though they were calling out to us. At first, we dismissed it as paranoia, a trick of the mind amplified by the oppressive solitude. But then there were the footsteps. In the dead of night, we heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching in the snow outside our cabin. They were slow, deliberate, and too close to ignore. But whenever we ventured outside, there was no sign of anyone or anything nearby. Only the endless white landscape, untouched and undisturbed, stretched before us. By the third week, the sense of unease was impossible to shake. Tensions within the group began to mount as more strange phenomena occurred. Equipment malfunctioned for no apparent reason. Our GPS devices often showed us standing in locations miles from our actual position. Worst of all, some of our team started to report seeing figures out in the distance, shadowy forms that seemed to watch us from the horizon before vanishing into the Arctic mist. One night, everything changed. We had gathered around the table for a quick meal while a loud thud echoed from the outside wall of the cabin. It sounded like something heavy had slammed against it with incredible force. The sound sent a wave of dread through the room. We exchanged nervous glances before Ben, one of the more seasoned members of our team, grabbed a flashlight and cautiously stepped outside. "Hello," he shouted into the empty night, the beam of his light cutting through the snowstorm that had picked up in intensity. There was no answer, just the unyielding howling of the wind. Ben's breath caught in his throat as his light fell upon a set of fresh footprints in the snow, leading away from the cabin. But these prints were unlike any we had seen before. They were deep, wide, and distinctly inhuman, almost as if they belonged to something much heavier than any of us. And worst of all, they appeared to be leading from the exact spot where the thud had come. That was when we realized it wasn't just the isolation playing tricks on us. Something was out there. Something ancient, malevolent, and unseen. Ben stood there, flashlight shaking slightly in his hand, his breath forming thick clouds in the freezing air. He was a sturdy guy, not one to scare easily. But at that moment, I could see the fear taking hold of him. His eyes were locked on the footprints, as if hoping they would somehow disappear or reveal themselves as some sort of optical illusion. "What the hell is that?" Sarah whispered, stepping out from the cabin and moving to Ben's side. The rest of us gathered behind her, each of us casting worried glances between the footprints and the surrounding wasteland. No one answered her question, but the silence spoke volumes. These prints weren't made by anything human. They were too large, too irregular. The deep indentations in the snow indicated something far heavier than any person could have caused them. Yet, there was no mistaking the fact that whatever had made those prints had been right next to our cabin, close enough to slam into it with enough force to shake the walls. It could be an animal, Tom suggested, though the uncertainty in his voice gave him away. The Arctic wasn't exactly a place bustling with wildlife. Polar bears, maybe, but even those were rare in the region we were exploring. And the prints didn't match anything we knew of. "Not a bear," Ben muttered, finally lowering his flashlight. "Too big. And it walks on 2 legs." Those words hung in the air like a curse. 2 legs. That meant whatever it was walking upright, like a human, but it wasn't human. My skin crawled at the thought. We huddled together outside, staring at the footprints, each of us feeling the oppressive weight of isolation settle deeper into our bones. It wasn't just the physical remoteness anymore. Now, it felt like we were truly alone, cut off from the safety of the world we knew and at the mercy of something far beyond our understanding. "Let's head back inside," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We'll deal with this in the morning." No one argued. We all retreated into the cabin, the thick wooden door slamming shut behind us with a finality that seemed to echo in the tense air. Inside, the dim light of our lanterns flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the walls. I glanced around at my team, Ben, Sarah, Tom, and the others. They all looked as shaken as I felt. We tried to distract ourselves by focusing on our routine tasks, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense that something was watching us. It was irrational, but the feeling was undeniable. Later that night, as I lay in my bunk, staring up at the ceiling, the whispers returned. This time, they were clearer, closer. I sat up, holding my breath, straining to listen. The wind was still howling outside, but beneath it, I could hear something else, soft, murmured voices, like a conversation happening just beyond the walls. I wasn't the only one who heard them. I could see the others stirring in their bunks, eyes wide, listening. No one spoke, but we all knew it wasn't our imagination. The voices were real. The next day, we decided to investigate the area around the cabin. There was no question anymore, something was out there. Something that didn't belong. We needed answers, and we needed them fast. Armed with flashlights, radios, and as much bravery as we could muster, we set out in small teams to scour the surrounding landscape. The weather had cleared up slightly, giving us better visibility, but the temperature had dropped even further. The air was so cold it burned to breathe, and the snow was now thick and powdery, making every step an effort. Ben and I were paired together, trudging through the snow in silence. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. We both knew what we were looking for, any sign of what had made those prints. But as we moved farther from the cabin, I felt a growing sense of unease, like we were being led somewhere, drawn deeper into the desolate expanse of white. We had been walking for about an hour when we found it, a tattered, half-buried flag sticking up from the snow. The flag was worn and faded, its colors long since bleached by the sun and the ice, but it was unmistakably the mark of a previous expedition. I felt a chill run down my spine, but it wasn't from the cold. Think this was part of the last team? Ben asked, his voice low. Could be, I replied, but I wasn't sure. The last expedition to this area had been a decade ago, and as far as we knew, they had never returned. Officially, they were declared missing, lost in a sudden storm. But as I stared at the faded flag, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else had happened to them, something far worse. We continued forward, our steps heavy in the deep snow. That's when we found the first body. It was lying half buried beneath a thin layer of frost, its clothing ragged and torn, the flesh beneath almost perfectly preserved by the cold. The face was twisted in an expression of pure terror, frozen in time. My stomach churned at the sight, but what struck me most was the position of the body. It was reaching out, as if trying to claw its way back to the surface. Ben knelt beside it, his gloved hand brushing away more snow. Jesus, he muttered under his breath. This is one of them. One of the last team. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. There were no visible wounds, no signs of an animal attack or exposure. It was as if the man had simply died from fear. As we continued our search, we found more bodies, each one frozen in a similar position, faces locked in the same expression of horror. Whatever had happened to these people, it had been sudden and terrifying. Back at the cabin, the others were waiting for us, huddled together around the small heater. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with anticipation. They could tell something was wrong the moment we walked through the door. We found them, Ben said quietly, sinking into a chair. We found the bodies. A heavy silence fell over the room. No one asked for details. They didn't need to. The haunted look in our eyes told them everything they needed to know. For the next few hours, we sat together, trying to make sense of what we had seen. But there were no answers. Only more questions. What had caused their deaths? And, more importantly, were we next? As night fell, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. The wind carried them through the cracks in the walls, filling the cabin with an eerie, disembodied chatter. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable, warning, pleading, desperate. It wasn't until the door slammed open in the middle of the night that we realized we weren't alone anymore. The door swung wide open, slamming against the wall with a violent crash, sending a gust of freezing wind and snow into the cabin. Everyone jumped to their feet, scrambling to grab anything they could use as a weapon, a knife, a flashlight, even a chair. But when the wind died down, nothing stood in the doorway. Just darkness, a void stretching out into the frozen wasteland. For a moment, we were paralyzed, staring into the cold, waiting for something to appear in the threshold. The whispers from earlier were gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I locked that door myself, Sarah said, her voice shaky, barely above a whisper. It can't just open like that. We all knew she was right. The wind might have been strong, but it wasn't powerful enough to break the heavy lock on the door. Something, or someone, had opened it. But there was no one outside. At least, no one we could see. Tom was the first to break the silence. We need to close it. Now. Ben and I exchanged a look, but neither of us moved. Closing that door meant stepping into the freezing darkness. It meant standing vulnerable in the open, exposed to whatever unseen force had blown it open in the first place. Finally, Sarah stepped forward, flashlight in hand, moving toward the door with slow, deliberate steps. She reached the threshold, hesitating for a split second before slamming it shut and locking it with trembling hands. As soon as the door was sealed, the whispers returned, faint at first, then louder, like a chorus of voices all speaking at once. They echoed through the walls, circling around us, growing more and more frantic. I strained to understand what they were saying, but the words were garbled, distorted, like a broken radio transmission. "They're getting closer," Sarah whispered, backing away from the door, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to figure out what's going on here," Ben said, his voice tense. "And we need to do it fast." We gathered in the center of the room, our backs to each other, forming a defensive circle. The temperature in the cabin had dropped significantly, and the small heater we had brought along was struggling to keep the room warm. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, my fingers stiffening with every passing minute. "What do we know?" I asked, trying to maintain some sense of control. "The bodies we found, there was no sign of injury. No animal tracks. Nothing that could explain what killed them. Maybe it was the cold," Tom suggested, though even he didn't sound convinced. "The cold wouldn't freeze their faces like that," Ben muttered. "It looked like they saw something that scared them to death." His words hung in the air like a death sentence. None of us wanted to believe it, but deep down, we all knew he was right. Whatever had happened to those people, it wasn't natural. And now, we were next. "I think it's them," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "The whispers. They're the spirits of the dead. They're trying to tell us something." I wanted to dismiss her words as paranoia, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The whispers had started the moment we discovered the footprints. They had grown louder as we found the bodies. Now, they were practically screaming at us. "They're trapped here," Sarah continued, her voice trembling. "Just like us. They want to warn us." "Warn us about what?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "I don't know," she replied, shaking her head. "But I think it has something to do with that last expedition. Whatever killed them, it's still here." The hours dragged on, and with every passing moment, the atmosphere in the cabin grew more oppressive. The whispers continued to echo through the walls, and the temperature dropped even further. We huddled together for warmth, our breaths forming clouds of vapor in the freezing air. Sleep was out of the question. None of us dared to close our eyes, afraid of what might happen if we let our guard down. I kept my flashlight trained on the door, half expecting it to burst open again at any moment. At some point during the night, Tom got up to check the heater. It had been sputtering for a while, and we were all starting to worry it might give out completely. He crouched down in front of it, fiddling with the controls, his breath fogging up the air around him. Just as he reached for the power switch, the lights in the cabin flickered, then went out completely. For a second, none of us moved. The darkness was absolute, swallowing everything around us. Then, from somewhere in the blackness, a low, guttural sound echoed through the cabin, like the growl of a predator closing in on its prey. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking, my heart racing. The beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on Tom, who was still crouched by the heater. His eyes were wide, his face pale with terror. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, barely able to speak. Before anyone could answer, the growl came again, louder this time, reverberating through the cabin. I swung my flashlight toward the source of the sound, my pulse pounding in my ears. The beam landed on the door. The door was shaking. "Get back!" Ben shouted, pulling Sarah behind him as he grabbed the nearest chair, raising it like a weapon. The door continued to rattle violently as if something or someone was trying to force its way in. The lock held, but the wooden frame was splintering under the pressure. Then, without warning, the door burst open, the wind howling through the cabin, sending papers and equipment flying in all directions. But it wasn't the wind that made my blood run cold. It was the figure standing in the doorway. A man, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes and frostbitten skin. He wore the tattered remains of an old expedition uniform, the same one we had found on the bodies earlier. His face was frozen in the same expression of terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, more figures appeared, their faces twisted in agony, their bodies broken and decayed, but somehow still standing. They moved toward us with slow, deliberate steps, their hollow eyes fixed on us, as if drawn by some unseen force. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering in my hand. We need to get out of here. Now. But there was nowhere to go. The dead had found us. I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, drenched in sweat. The relentless storm outside seemed to match the chaos in my mind. The voices were louder now, echoing through the walls, whispering my name, tugging at my consciousness like a nightmare that refused to fade. It felt as though they were inside my head, scratching at the corners of my sanity. Daniel, a voice called, chillingly familiar. It was Robert's voice. I shot up, my breath catching in my throat. He was dead. The realization struck me like a punch to the gut, but the voice persisted, growing more insistent. Daniel, come find me. Compelled by an unknown force, I climbed out of my sleeping bag and tiptoed toward the door. Each creak of the floorboards sent a shiver down my spine. The storm raged on outside, but all I could hear was the soft pleading of the voice. It wasn't just a voice, it was a lure, a pull that was both terrifying and comforting. I opened the door and stepped into the darkened corridor. The flickering light from the emergency lanterns cast eerie shadows that danced across the walls, creating grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out for me. My breath quickened as I made my way down the hallway, my mind racing with questions. Was this real? Was I losing my grip on reality? As I approached the common room, the whispers grew louder. I felt an inexplicable chill wash over me, and an icy draft slipped through the corridor. The temperature plummeted, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. The door to the common room was ajar, and I pushed it open slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. The room was dimly lit, the shadows shifting ominously. I stepped inside, heart pounding, the whispers now a cacophony of voices. They were speaking in a frantic, overlapping chorus, and I couldn't make sense of what they were saying. I strained to listen, hoping for a single word that could ground me in reality. Suddenly, a figure materialized in the corner of the room, cloaked in darkness. My stomach dropped as I recognized it, Robert. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow, a twisted semblance of the friend I had known. Daniel, he rasped, voice dripping with desperation. Help me. Fear clawed at my insides, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to move. He reached out a skeletal hand, beckoning me closer. I wanted to scream, to run, but the pull of his presence was overpowering. You shouldn't have come here, he continued, voice echoing with a haunting resonance. We're trapped. Trapped? What do you mean? I managed to stammer, my voice barely a whisper. The expedition, it wasn't just the cold that killed us. It was something else. Something hungry, he warned, his expression twisting in anguish. You need to leave before it finds you too. As he spoke, the room shifted around me, the walls seeming to pulse as if alive. I felt the very air grow heavy, thick with dread. It was as if the shadows were closing in, suffocating me with their presence. "I can't leave without you," I protested, my heart aching at the sight of my friend in such torment. "It's too late for me," he hissed, his voice rising with urgency. "But you can still escape. Find the others and leave this place. It wants your soul." Suddenly, the shadows lunged forward, engulfing Robert. He screamed, a bone-chilling sound that pierced through the darkness, before disappearing entirely. The room fell silent, leaving only the echo of his warning lingering in the air. I stumbled back, my heart racing as panic flooded my mind. I had to get out of here. I turned to flee but found the doorway blocked. Dark, swirling tendrils coiled around it, pulsating with a malevolent energy. I felt an overwhelming sense of doom wash over me, and I knew I was no longer in control. I stumbled backwards, crashing into the furniture, desperate to escape the encroaching shadows. My breath came in short gasps as I looked around for a way out, but the darkness was everywhere. "Get away from me!" I screamed, swinging my arms wildly, but it was no use. The shadows wrapped around me, pulling me into their icy embrace. As I struggled, I felt the coldness seep into my bones, freezing me in place. The voices returned, chanting my name in a sinister harmony, drowning out all rational thought. In that moment, I understood this place was a trap, a lure for lost souls seeking refuge from the storm. And now it had claimed me. With every ounce of strength, I fought against the shadows, tearing myself free from their grasp. I couldn't give in. I couldn't let them win. I turned and ran toward the only other exit, the back door leading out into the snow. Bursting through, I was met with the howling wind, the storm more fierce than ever. The cold bit at my skin, but I pressed on, driven by sheer survival instinct. I could see the faint glow of the research tent in the distance. My friends might still be inside. I had to warn them. As I sprinted through the snow, I felt something behind me, a presence lurking just out of sight. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and my blood turned to ice. The shadows swirled behind me, coalescing into grotesque shapes that seemed to stretch towards me with intent. I knew they wouldn't stop until they had me. With renewed determination, I pushed myself harder, the tent growing closer with each stride. But just as I reached for the zipper, a deafening roar erupted behind me, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door. What if I was too late? What if the others had already succumbed to the dark forces lurking within? The roar was followed by the sound of scratching, scraping, a noise that felt all too familiar. I had heard it before, in my dreams, and now it was coming for me in the real world. Time seemed to slow as I unzipped the tent, bursting inside, gasping for breath. "Help!" I cried, collapsing to my knees. "We have to leave. We're not alone." The others looked at me, wide-eyed with fear. "What happened?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I glanced back at the entrance, my heart racing. "It's here. The spirits of the past. They won't let us go." Their faces paled as the shadows began to creep through the opening. They were here, in the tent now, reaching for us with icy fingers, drawn to our warmth and life. The whispers turned into screams, a chorus of torment echoing around us. "We need to barricade the entrance," Mark shouted, his face etched with fear. We rushed to block the door, adrenaline fueling our movements. But I knew deep down it might already be too late. The shadows twisted and writhed, clawing at the fabric of the tent, desperate to claim us. I turned to my friends, fear gripping my heart. We can't let them take us. We need to confront this together. As we prepared to face the encroaching darkness, I felt the weight of despair closing in around us. I could sense that this was not just a fight for our lives, but a battle against the very essence of our humanity. In that moment, I understood. The expedition had uncovered something ancient and malevolent, something that should have remained buried. Now, we were its unwitting victims, trapped in a cycle of despair that threatened to consume us all. I braced myself as the shadows surged forward, swallowing the light, their whispers a deafening roar of chaos. It was time to confront our fate, whatever that may be. The shadows enveloped us, a living entity of darkness that sought to consume everything in its path. We huddled together, desperate to fend off the encroaching doom. The tent felt increasingly suffocating as the air turned cold and thick with despair. Each breath I took felt like inhaling ice, freezing my resolve. We can't let it take us. I shouted, trying to rally my friends. Their eyes reflected the sheer terror that gripped them, and I could see doubt flickering across their faces. But this was no time for fear. We had to fight back, to confront whatever malevolence lay within those shadows. "Daniel's right," Sarah said, her voice trembling but resolute. "We need to stand together. We can't let it divide us." Mark nodded, clenching his fists. "Whatever this is, it feeds on our fear. We have to face it, not let it control us." The shadows writhed, as if sensing our defiance. They lashed out, tendrils of darkness snaking toward us, hungry for our warmth. "Close your eyes," I urged, trying to shield my friends from the overwhelming darkness. "Focus on each other. Remember who we are." We formed a circle, hands clasped, grounding each other in the growing chaos. On the count of 3, we shout together. I commanded, heart racing. "We have to show it we're not afraid. 1, 2, 3. "Leave us alone," we cried in unison, our voices melding into a single powerful declaration that echoed against the walls of the tent. For a moment, the shadows hesitated, recoiling as if struck. I felt a flicker of hope igniting within me. Perhaps we could fight this. Perhaps we could reclaim our lives from the grasp of the unknown. But the respite was brief. The darkness surged forward again, angrier and more insistent than before, feeding on our fear and desperation. I could feel its icy tendrils wrapping around my throat, squeezing tightly, constricting my breath. "Fight it!" I gasped, my voice barely a whisper as the darkness threatened to engulf me. I strained against its grip, channeling every ounce of willpower I had left. "Daniel!" Sarah's voice pierced through the chaos, a lifeline amid the tempest. "Remember the warmth of the sun, the laughter we shared. Hold on to that." Her words resonated within me, sparking a flicker of defiance. I closed my eyes and envisioned the sun, its golden rays warming my skin, the joy of shared moments with my friends. I concentrated on those memories, letting them wash over me like a wave, pushing back against the shadows. With renewed determination, I felt the shadows loosen their grip. "Together!" I shouted again. "We can break this!" The darkness roared in anger, a deafening sound that threatened to drown us. But we held our ground, our resolve solidifying into a beacon of light amid the encroaching gloom. We channeled our shared memories, the warmth, the laughter, the joy, into a collective force, pushing against the darkness. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the center of our circle, illuminating the tent with a brilliance that cut through the shadows. The dark tendrils shrieked, retreating in horror as the light expanded, consuming the darkness around us. "Keep it going," Mark yelled, his voice strong and fierce. "Don't let up." We focused on the light, feeling its warmth spread through us, energizing our spirits. I could see the fear in my friend's eyes fade, replaced by determination. We were no longer victims, we were warriors, fighting for our very souls. With a final surge of energy, we shouted, "We are not afraid." The combined force of our voices resonated with power, echoing through the dark, driving it back even further. The shadows writhed and convulsed, their forms twisting and distorting as they fought against the light. But it was futile. We were stronger together. I could feel the oppressive weight of fear lifting, replaced by a sense of clarity. As the last remnants of darkness dissolved, I gasped for breath, heart pounding wildly in my chest. The tent was now bathed in a warm glow, the shadows vanquished, leaving only a faint whisper in the air, a memory of what had once been. Did we do it?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling yet filled with hope. "We did," I said, disbelief washing over me. "We fought back." But even as I spoke, a sense of unease settled within me. Something still felt amiss. The air was thick with a lingering tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we had merely scratched the surface of whatever evil resided in this desolate land. "Let's get out of here," Mark urged, his eyes darting to the entrance. "Before it comes back." We hurriedly gathered our things, adrenaline fueling our movements. I glanced outside, the storm still raging but somehow different, less threatening. The snow swirled violently, but I felt a sense of determination wash over me. We would not be taken so easily. As we emerged from the tent, the howling wind hit us like a wall, but we pushed forward, moving toward the research base. We needed to regroup, to figure out our next steps. But as we approached, a chilling realization struck me. The lights were out. "Where is everyone?" I whispered, a cold knot of fear tightening in my stomach. Mark moved ahead cautiously, his face pale as he surveyed the surrounding area. "Maybe they're just inside," he said, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. We reached the door, pushing it open. The interior was shrouded in darkness, the faintest flickers of light struggling to break through. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant howling of the wind outside. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing through the silence. "Is anyone here?" There was no response. The emptiness wrapped around us like a shroud, and dread pulled in my gut. I felt the darkness creeping back, a chill running down my spine as I glanced around the deserted base. The atmosphere was suffocating, the shadows lurking just beyond the reach of the flickering lights. As we moved deeper into the base, the sense of abandonment grew. Papers were scattered across desks, equipment lay overturned, and the once bustling research center felt like a tomb. I shivered, the oppressive atmosphere gnawing at my nerves. Suddenly, a distant sound caught my attention, a faint whisper echoing through the halls. "Daniel." My heart raced as I turned to my friends, their expressions mirroring my fear. "Did you hear that?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. They nodded, eyes wide with trepidation. We exchanged fearful glances, the unspoken understanding passing between us. We were not alone. The whisper grew louder, calling my name, each syllable dripping with malevolence. "Daniel, join us." "No," I breathed, stepping back instinctively. "We need to leave." But the whispers swelled, a cacophony of voices overlapping, clawing at the edges of my sanity. It was an onslaught of confusion and dread, urging me to succumb to the darkness that had claimed so many before me. "Fight it!" Sarah yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. We can't let it win. With renewed determination, I focused on the bond we shared, the memories, the laughter, the light that had driven back the shadows in the tent. We were stronger together, and I refused to let this darkness take us. I took a deep breath, stepping forward, gripping my friend's hands tightly. We won't let you take us, I shouted, my voice rising above the chorus of whispers. We are not afraid. The whispers faltered, the darkness recoiling as we stood together, united against the encroaching horror. The lights flickered back to life, illuminating the room in a warm glow, and I could see the shadows retreating, dissolving like mist in the sunlight. Keep going, Mark urged, his voice strong and unwavering. We can break free. Together, we pushed through the fear, chanting our resolve as we moved deeper into the base. The darkness fought back, but we pressed on, refusing to be overwhelmed. The whispers grew fainter, replaced by our own voices echoing through the halls. And then, suddenly, the ground shook beneath us. I stumbled, struggling to maintain my balance as the walls trembled. What's happening? Sarah cried, fear etched across her face. It's trying to hold us here, I shouted. We have to keep moving. As we dashed through the hallways, the very foundation of the research base groaned in protest, threatening to collapse around us. I could feel the darkness swirling, trying to reclaim us, but we wouldn't let it. We wouldn't become just another tale of loss. With every ounce of strength, we raced toward the exit. The howling wind beckoned from outside, a promise of freedom. I could see the door ahead, glimmering like a beacon of hope amid the chaos. Almost there, I urged, adrenaline coursing through my veins. But just as we reached the door, the ground shook violently again, and the shadows surged forward, angry and relentless. I felt a hand grip my shoulder, pulling me back as I stumbled, fear clawing at my throat. No! I shouted, panic surging through me. We have to go. But the darkness was upon us, tendrils wrapping around my friends, dragging them back into the abyss. Daniel! Mark's voice rang out, a desperate plea amid the chaos. I couldn't let them go. Not now. I lunged forward, gripping Sarah's hand tightly as she struggled against the dark, her face a mask of terror. Hold on, I cried, determination surging within me. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pulled against the darkness, focusing on the light that had saved us before. We are not afraid, I shouted, feeling the shadows tremble at the power of our resolve. The darkness shrieked, and the ground shook violently once more, but we held fast. I could feel the light growing within us, a radiant force pushing back against the encroaching darkness. And in that moment, something shifted. The shadows recoiled, their grip loosening as the light expanded, enveloping us in warmth. With one final, desperate cry, I wrenched Sarah free, pulling her close as the light engulfed us. The shadows shrieked in fury, their forms dissipating in a brilliant burst of illumination, and I felt a sense of triumph wash over me. We stumbled through the door, collapsing onto the snow-covered ground, gasping for breath. The storm raged around us, but we were free. The darkness was behind us, its hold broken by the strength of our bond. As we lay there, the storm gradually began to subside, the howling wind softening into a gentle breeze. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me, but the lingering fear in my chest reminded me of the darkness we had just escaped. Is it over? Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she looked at me. I nodded slowly, though doubt gnawed at me. For now, yes. but we have to be careful. This isn't finished. As we huddled together, I could see the first hints of dawn breaking on the horizon, the light spilling across the snow-covered landscape. Hope began to blossom within me, the warmth of the sun chasing away the remnants of the night. But even as we embraced that hope, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was still out there, lurking just beyond the edges of our reality, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. Together, we would face it. Together, we would fight. And whatever shadows awaited us, we would stand united against the darkness. As the first light of dawn painted the snowy landscape in hues of pink and gold, we gathered ourselves, still shaken but alive. The air was crisp, tinged with the faint smell of pine and the distant scent of melting snow. My heart raced as I glanced back at the research base, its silhouette stark against the morning light. It stood there, foreboding and silent, holding the memories of our harrowing night. "Do you think anyone survived?" Mark's voice broke the silence, filled with uncertainty. "I don't know," I admitted, unease creeping back into my mind. "We need to find out. We can't leave without knowing what happened to the others." With resolve, we turned back toward the base, steeling ourselves for what lay ahead. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of dread settling in my chest. As we approached the door, I hesitated, fear prickling at the back of my mind. "Are we sure we want to do this?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if the darkness comes back?" "It can't," I insisted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We faced it. We beat it. We just have to find the others and get out of here." Pushing the door open, the hinges creaked in protest, echoing through the empty halls. The darkness that had once swallowed us seemed to linger, clinging to the corners of the room like a bad memory. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I forced myself to move forward, my friends following closely behind. "Hello?" I called out again, the emptiness swallowing my voice. "Is anyone here?" There was no response, only the soft hum of the wind outside and the creaking of the building. Each room we entered was a ghost of its former self, filled with overturned furniture and scattered papers, a testament to the chaos that had unfolded during the night. As we searched the first few rooms, I found myself looking for signs of life, any hint that our colleagues had managed to escape the darkness. But all I found were remnants of their presence, a coffee cup half full on a desk, a jacket draped over a chair, the faint echo of laughter that felt like a distant dream. "Look," Mark said, pointing to a bulletin board covered in maps and notes. They were planning another expedition to the ice shelf. Maybe they left clues about their whereabouts? We crowded around the board, searching for anything that could guide us. Amidst the chaos, I noticed a map with a circled area marked in red, its lines detailed with notes. "This might be where they went," I said, tracing my finger along the route. "It looks like they intended to explore some caves near the ice shelf." "Then we need to head there," Sarah urged, her eyes wide with urgency. "They could be in trouble. We can't leave them behind." Nodding, I felt a surge of determination. "Let's grab supplies and go. We can't waste any more time." We quickly gathered gear, thermal blankets, flashlights, food rations, and climbing gear before making our way back to the door. As we stepped outside, the cold air hit us like a slap, but it also cleared my mind. We were alive, and we still had a chance to help our friends. The snow crunched under our feet as we began our trek toward the ice shelf, the sun rising higher in the sky, casting a golden glow over the pristine landscape. I felt a sense of purpose surging within me, mingling with the remnants of fear from the night before. We were heading into the unknown again, but this time I wouldn't let the darkness claim us. As we climbed the ridge, the vast expanse of the ice shelf unfolded before us, a breathtaking sight of glistening white, dotted with deep blue crevasses. The air was sharp and clear, filling my lungs with a sense of clarity. But the beauty was marred by an unsettling silence, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting. Do you think they could have gone into one of those caves? Mark asked, squinting into the distance where dark openings gaped like mouths waiting to swallow the unwary. It's possible, I replied, my heart pounding at the thought. We should check them out, one by one. We approached the nearest cave cautiously, the sunlight fading as we entered its dark maw. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath forming icy clouds in front of me. We turned on our flashlights, illuminating the rocky walls adorned with frozen stalactites. Hello? I called again, my voice echoing through the cavern. Is anyone here? Silence answered, stretching out in all directions. My stomach churned with anxiety as we ventured deeper into the cave, the light from our flashlights casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. As we moved further in, I began to feel an unsettling presence, a weight in the air that made my skin crawl. Something doesn't feel right, Sarah said, her voice shaky. I feel like we're being watched. Just keep moving, I urged, trying to suppress my own rising fear. We'll find them. They have to be here somewhere. We continued through the winding passages, our flashlights flickering over the rough terrain. Suddenly, Mark stumbled, nearly falling as he caught himself against the wall. What the hell was that? He gasped, eyes wide with terror. What? I asked, turning back to him. Did you hear that? He said, breathless. It sounded like whispers. I strained to listen, my heart racing. There it was, a soft, haunting murmur that echoed through the cave, growing louder, more insistent. The words were indistinguishable, but the tone was unmistakably familiar. Daniel, join us. Not again, I whispered, dread flooding my veins. We have to go back. But before we could turn around, the darkness seemed to swell around us, pulsating with an unnatural energy. The whispers escalated into a cacophony, a whirlwind of voices that clawed at my sanity, threatening to pull us into the abyss. Fight it! I shouted, grabbing Sarah and Mark by the arms. We need to stay together. The shadows surged forward, tendrils of darkness wrapping around our legs, trying to drag us down into the depths. Hold on! I cried, struggling against the pull. We can't let it take us. With every ounce of strength, we fought back, focused on the light that still flickered within us. The whispers shrieked, angry and desperate, as we stood our ground, refusing to be consumed. The cave trembled, rocks crumbling from the walls as the darkness writhed around us. We have to push through. Mark yelled, his voice filled with determination. Together! I shouted, channeling our shared memories, the warmth of friendship flooding my thoughts. We are not afraid. In that moment, a surge of energy erupted from our hearts, and the darkness recoiled, shrieking in fury. The light grew, illuminating the cave with a brilliance that banished the shadows. Keep going, I urged, leading my friends deeper into the cave as the darkness writhed and twisted behind us. The whispers faded, replaced by the sound of our pounding hearts and heavy breaths. We stumbled into a larger chamber, the air thick with tension. My flashlight caught movement in the corner, and I froze, heart racing. There, huddled against the wall, were two of our missing colleagues, their eyes wide with fear and shock. We thought we'd never see anyone again, one of them exclaimed, relief flooding her voice. Are you okay? Sarah rushed forward, helping them to their feet. We have to get out of here. As we turned to leave, the darkness surged again, filling the chamber with an oppressive weight. It's back, I shouted, panic flooding my veins. We can't let it take us again, Mark yelled, determination burning in his eyes. Together, we formed a tight circle, our hands clasped together as the shadows writhed around us. We won't be afraid, I shouted, channeling the strength of our group. We'll fight it. As we stood united, the shadows hesitated, their tendrils recoiling from the light emanating from our hearts. The chamber erupted with brilliance, illuminating every corner, casting away the darkness. We are not alone, I cried, my voice strong and unwavering. We will overcome this. The darkness shrieked in fury, but we pushed forward, our light growing ever stronger. I could feel the energy pulsating through our circle, an unbreakable bond that the darkness could not sever. With one final push, we surged toward the entrance, the light blinding as we burst into the open air. The storm had died down, the sun shining brightly overhead. We had made it. As we emerged, the shadows retreated, their forms dissipating into nothingness. We fell to our knees, gasping for breath, the cold air filling our lungs as we reveled in our freedom. We did it, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. We really did it. But even as I felt a sense of triumph, a nagging fear settled in my chest. What if it comes back? I asked, glancing around at the vast expanse of snow and ice. What if it's still out there? Mark shook his head. We faced it. We fought together. We can do it again if we have to. I nodded slowly, feeling the warmth of my friends surrounding me. We were alive, together, and we would not let the darkness claim us again. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the snow, I realized that while the darkness may linger, we had the strength to face it. Together, we would carry on, united against whatever horrors awaited us in the future. And as long as we stood together, the darkness would never win. Days passed after our harrowing escape from the caves, and the polar wilderness felt both familiar and alien. We settled back into the research base, a semblance of normalcy returning as we processed our experiences. Yet, beneath the surface, an unease lingered, a reminder of the darkness we had faced. We would sit together in the evenings, sharing stories of the expedition and attempting to make sense of it all, but the shadows remained ever present, lurking in the corners of our minds. One night, as we huddled around the dim light of a flickering lantern, I sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The air felt charged, heavy with unspoken words. Do you think it's really gone? I finally asked, my voice trembling. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know, she admitted, her fingers nervously tracing patterns on the table. But we've been through so much. We can't let fear control us. Mark leaned forward, his expression grave. Maybe it's not about the darkness itself, but what it represents. The isolation, the fear of the unknown. We've faced it, and we survived. I wish I could believe that, I murmured, glancing at the window. The wind howled outside, sending shivers through the walls of the base. But there's still a part of me that feels like it's watching, waiting. As if on cue, a sudden chill swept through the room, causing us all to shudder. The lantern flickered violently, casting eerie shadows on the walls. What was that? Sarah gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Mark replied, his eyes darting to the dark corners of the room. But we need to stay together. Whatever it is, We can face it together. Summoning our courage, we rose from our seats, forming a united front against the encroaching darkness. We moved toward the main entrance of the base, determined to confront whatever awaited us. The howling wind intensified as we opened the door, the snow swirling like a tempest, but we pressed on. As we stepped outside, I felt a deep foreboding. The polar landscape stretched before us, shrouded in an unsettling silence. It was as if the world held its breath, waiting for something to unfold. This way, I urged, leading us toward the ridge where we had seen the shadows emerge before. The snow crunched beneath our boots, the cold biting at our exposed skin. We climbed higher, the wind howling like a banshee as it whipped around us. Each step felt heavier, as if the weight of our past experiences clung to us like a shroud. Then we reached the top, and the world below opened up. The vast expanse of snow glimmered under the moonlight, but something felt wrong. In the distance, shadows flickered, figures moving just beyond our reach. My heart raced as I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Do you see that?" I breathed, pointing toward the dark shapes that danced on the horizon. "Yes," Mark confirmed, his voice strained. "We need to get closer." We descended into the valley, the figures becoming clearer as we approached. They were ethereal, wisps of smoke that twisted and turned in the air, calling to us with soft, mournful whispers. "Join us," they beckoned, their voices a haunting melody that sent chills down my spine. "What do they want?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with fear. "I think they want us to remember," I replied, realizing the truth behind their presence. "They're not just shadows, they're the spirits of those who came before us. They want us to acknowledge their pain, their suffering." As we moved closer, I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow wash over me, memories of the past flooding my mind. I could see the faces of those lost, the explorers who had come here before us, their eyes filled with despair. "We must help them find peace," I urged, a sense of purpose igniting within me. "Help them how?" Mark asked, glancing at me with concern. "By understanding their stories," I replied, the words spilling from my lips. "We need to remember what happened to them and acknowledge their suffering. We can't let their voices fade into the darkness." In that moment, the whispers grew louder, swirling around us like a tempest. I closed my eyes, allowing the memories to wash over me. I could see them, lost souls trapped in the ice, forever bound to the land. I felt their pain, their longing for closure. "Tell us your stories," I called out, my voice rising above the cacophony. "We hear you. We remember." The shadows paused, hovering in the air, as if considering my words. A deep silence fell over the valley, and I could feel the tension in the air shift. One by one, the figures began to take shape, forming into recognizable forms, fellow explorers, their faces etched with sorrow and regret. You remember us," one of them whispered, a woman with hollow eyes that shimmered like ice. "Yes," I replied, tears streaming down my face. "We remember your sacrifice. We acknowledge your pain." As I spoke, the other figures began to emerge, their spectral forms coalescing into a semblance of humanity. They surrounded us, their presence both comforting and heartbreaking. I could feel their anguish, their stories intertwining with our own. "We were lost," another figure, a man with a beard of frost, said softly. "We sought knowledge, but we found only despair. We cannot move on until we are remembered." "We will remember," I vowed, my voice breaking. "Your stories will not be forgotten." The figures began to fade, their ethereal forms shimmering in the moonlight. Thank you, they whispered in unison, their voices a soft echo in the night. Thank you for hearing us. As the last of the figures disappeared, a profound sense of peace settled over the valley. The oppressive weight that had hung over us lifted, replaced by a warm light that enveloped us. We stood together, breathless and transformed. We did it, Sarah breathed, her eyes shining with unshed tears. We helped them find peace. Together, Mark added, smiling through the remnants of our fear. We faced the darkness and came out stronger. As we made our way back to the base, the night air felt different, crisp and clear, as if the world had exhaled. The weight of isolation that had once pressed upon us seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sense of unity and purpose. We knew that while the darkness may linger in the corners of our minds, we had the strength to face it. Together, we had turned our fear into understanding, our suffering into hope. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and orange, I took a deep breath, embracing the new day. We had survived the polar wilderness, not just as explorers, but as bearers of stories of our own and those who had come before us. And as long as we remembered, the ghosts of the polar expedition would never be forgotten. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.